All right, I have straight up at 12 o'clock, Allison. I think we're ready to get started.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us for virtual vernal pools. I'm Christine Fontaine, Director of Education at the Laguna Foundation. We're a not-for-profit organization working to preserve and restore the Laguna de Santa Rosa and to inspire appreciation for Sonoma County's wetland of international importance. The Laguna's 22-mile watercourse is a mosaic of wetlands and a unique and defining feature of Sonoma County. Not only does it provide scenic vistas, open space, flood protection for our communities, and fertile soil for agriculture, more than 200 species of birds have been sighted along the Laguna, and bald eagles even nest along its banks. One of the reasons the Laguna is designated as a wetland of international importance is due to the vital food and shelter resources it provides for birds migrating on the Pacific Flyway. Another reason for the international designation is the vernal pools located throughout the Santa Rosa Plain, including the animals and the rare, endemic, yet threatened plants that depend upon them. So it seems fitting that our first online program would focus on the unique features of vernal pools. We hope your admiration, wonder, and awe for vernal pools deepens today. Our presenter is Allison Titus, the Community Education Manager here at the Laguna Foundation. Her work is focused on creating a year-round program of art and natural history classes, outings, and workshops. She also provides outdoor leadership and mentoring for teens and children during our summer program, Camp Thule. Additionally, Allison has worked in conservation management on Mount Tamalpais and out in the field with Laguna Foundation's restoration and conservation team of specialists. Let's get started on our virtual vernal pool journey. Allison?
Thank you, Christine. Hello and happy Earth Day. What an amazing legacy to reflect on today. 50 years since the first Earth Day, a huge moment in the environmental movement. Cheers to that. Thank you for joining me this afternoon and taking this hour to learn about one of the most fascinating ecosystems we have here in Sonoma County, vernal pools. This is our very first online program, and it's my honor to share this information with you. I'm still getting used to presenting to an empty room, so to speak, so bear with me. And here's a few housekeeping items that will help you have a successful webinar experience. So you are muted and your video is off, and that's on purpose. If I could see and hear each and every one of you, it would be pretty chaotic. I will have my video on for my introduction now, and then when we take questions throughout the webinar, but I won't have it on the whole time. As Christine mentioned, you can chat in the chat box and say hello, and we encourage that. You can also add your questions throughout the webinar to the chat box. We will stop and take questions periodically during this hour, and we will have a longer Q&A at the very end. So you can click on that chat box icon and get started by saying hi. And if you have any questions, you can add them now. As Christine said, I worked in conservation management on Mount Tamalpais in Marin County for a couple seasons before joining the Laguna Foundation Education Department. I have since had the privilege to visit a few of our vernal pool sites that we monitor and assisted with our vernal pool program a little bit this spring before the shelter-in-place order went into effect. That being said, I would describe myself as a botany enthusiast, but I am by no means an expert. My goal is to share the foundational knowledge about vernal pools, show you lots of beautiful pictures of vernal pools, and provide insight into what exactly makes vernal pools so special. I will do my best to answer your questions, and if there's something I don't know, we'll write it down and follow up with an email after the webinar has concluded. All right, I think that's all I've got. Feel free to interact in that chat box and we'll go ahead and dive in. I will turn my video off for now. Okay, this is our agenda for the webinar, starting with a photo tour of vernal pools. We will go over what a vernal pool actually is, why we care about them, what the threats are to vernal pools, our conservation work on vernal pools, and we have some exciting and hopeful news for this Earth Day to share with you. You will be the first members of the public to get this news, so you can look forward to that here in a few slides. And as I said, I'll do my best with your questions at the very end, including a couple that were emailed to me this last week. Okay, our first vernal pool. Vernal pools are all around us. You may see them when driving from Santa Rosa to Sebastopol or vice versa across the Santa Rosa Plain. However, even though vernal pools are all around us, most people are not aware that this is what they are looking at. This is the most common type of vernal pool viewed while you are zooming down rural roads in your car. You can see a slight change in the vegetation. So note the bright acid green grass on the sides of the pool. So here, here, and in the background. And then there's the tall, darker green and brown California semaphore grass that's in the vernal pool. And that is a lovely vernal pool grass species that we find in a lot of the pools in Sonoma County. This is a natural vernal pool in a private dairy off of Llano Road. There is actually Sonoma sunshine and Sebastopol meadow foam nestled within the grasses, but you can't see them from afar, which is common, you know, if you're zooming down the road in your car, you won't see the diversity of species hidden within the pool. So this is a vernal pool that is mostly dominated by invasive plants, but you can still see the difference in vegetation color to distinguish wetland from upland. It's a little more faint, but you can see the pool in the foreground here, and then the upland grass species in the background there. Now, this is a typical vernal pool. The white flower you see is common meadow foam. This pool is just west of Youth Community Park. Another type of vernal pool that we have is actually man-made vernal pools. There are several man-made vernal pools across the Santa Rosa Plain. This one is near Fulton Road and was a mitigation for the housing development you can see in the background. The pools on this site had been leveled and filled a long time ago. And then the created pools you see here were carved out of the soil surface, utilizing the natural hard pan underneath. And that is all Sonoma sunshine. This is another typical vernal pool, this one with the rare Sebastopol meadow foam. This is yet another slightly different type of vernal pool. This is a horse-grazed vernal pool. It's in a yard on Bravo Toro Lane, just in our backyard from the Laguna Environmental Center. This is an old photo. It's about 10 years old, but it really shows the value of grazing on vernal pools. The bright yellow is the rare Burke's Goldfield. Vernal pools have high levels of biodiversity, as you can see demonstrated here in this pool. Many plant species can co-dominate in pools. So the purple you see here is Pagogeny deglossii. That's an indicator vernal pool plant. The bright lemon yellow in the foreground is a Castanea species. And then the dark yellow in the foreground, kind of here, is Burke's Goldfields once again. So once again, you can see the outline of the pool, and it looks different in this pool than it did in the other ones. They vary quite a bit. And finally, vernal pools can also be dominated by green, less showy plants. This dark green in the vernal pool is Eleochris macrostachya, and this is typical in a lot of deep vernal pools. All right, that concludes the photo tour to start us out. Now let's talk about what a vernal pool actually is. So vernal pools are essentially small, seasonal wetlands. As some of you probably know, wetlands are areas where water covers the soil or is present either at or near the surface of the soil all year or for varying periods of time during the year. Water saturation or hydrology largely determines how the soil develops and the types of plant and animal communities living in and on the soil. So wetlands may support both aquatic and terrestrial species. So the prolonged presence of water creates conditions that favor the growth of specially adapted plants, which is what this list here is a bunch of indicator plants for vernal pools. And that prolonged presence of water also promotes the development of characteristic wetland soils. So vernal pools are specifically seasonal wetlands, since they are wet during some of the year, and then they completely dry up the rest of the year. As you can see here, they can range from sort of bare soil to just dried up plant species in the middle of a pool. So vernal pools typically occur in areas with Mediterranean climates. You've probably heard that term thrown around a lot. This special climate, often referenced in botanical and ecological presentations, are very limited throughout the world. It's characterized by mild winters with a defined rainy season and hot, dry summers, which makes them very desirable places to live. All right, so this is a great graphic that can help us understand how vernal pools are formed. So if you look here, you've got some different layers in the soil, and then these designate different zones within the vernal pool. And this is kind of the language we use when we're talking about vernal pools at the Laguna Foundation. So the lowest point here is the pool, the vernal pool. The upland is the area outside of the pool, and the transitional zone will often have saturated soil and a mix of vernal pool plants and upland plants, but it is not below that perched water table there. As you can see, there's the water table, the hard pan or clay pan below that. That is a critical component to creating vernal pools, and then the subsoil underneath. This white section here is actually a very important part. This is the soil horizon layer. And the depth of soil is very important for vernal pool plants. So invading plants prefer this deeper soil. So vernal pool plants have a competitive edge when that soil horizon is about half a foot approximately or less. So we think that makes the habitat better suited for the vernal pool plants. They've evolved over years to get used to these unique conditions of being flooded part of the time and dry the rest of the year. So this area is less suited for those introduced species that need deep roots. So this also answers the question, you may wonder, can you put a hose in a depression in your yard and get a vernal pool? The answer is possibly. you would need a perched water table like this, or else the water would just go into the soil all around that area. It's like if you made a depression into a sponge. It's a very dynamic hydrologic situation. Okay, so we just went over a lot of different conditions that make a vernal pool. We've learned that vernal pools are seasonal wetlands created by an impermeable layer in the soil. These seasonal wetlands also hold specific indicator plants, which I'll go over now. There are many plants that are specifically associated with the seasonal conditions found in vernal pools. An assemblage of those indicator plants is important in identifying a vernal pool. Like I said, I'm not a botanist by trade, so I'll do my best here, but these photos highlight some of the plants found in vernal pools in the short growing season before they completely dry up. And they are also all indicator plants that help biologists define that what they are looking at is a vernal pool. Okay, so these are some indicator plants found in Sonoma County vernal pools. We have Pagogeny douglasii, that's the purple here, and it looks really similar to a different invasive plant in vernal pools. So this is California semaphore grass, this beautiful one blade of grass coming up here in the middle that I mentioned earlier. This is a vernal pool generalist. You can see it in lots of wet areas, not just vernal pools throughout Sonoma County. And then this yellow is the Burke's goldfields, one of our rare plants that we have here in the Laguna watershed. So the important thing to note is that if any one of these plants was found by itself in a pool, that wouldn't necessarily make it a vernal pool. You need to have an assemblage or multiple species present, as this photo demonstrates. Close up of that Pagogeny there, and the semaphore grass, and the goldfields. So beautiful. These are some more indicator vernal pool plants. So these ones are tiny. There's nothing to show for scale here, but a human finger would look huge in this picture and would likely cover up these plants entirely. So this is spotted throat down ninja, and then dwarf woolly heads, or I've heard them called woolly marbles too. They are just growing right on the ground there. All right, so there are common species found in vernal pools, but they can be extremely rare locally because vernal pools are not a common habitat. For example, this is a common species, but we've only seen it in one location in Sonoma County. This is wetland checker mallow found in vernal pools. This is an example of another strange plant often found in vernal pools. Some of you might recognize it from other places. This stringy plant is dodder. It winds around, as you can see, the other plants in vernal pools. It's actually parasitic on other plants. Because it has no need to produce its own nutrients, it does not have to perform photosynthesis. And you'll see this pop up in vernal pools as well as other habitats. It's a very interesting plant. Many of the fascinating indicator plants of vernal pools are tiny, weird green plants. They're not everybody's thing, but they are really cool, and we have a lot of diversity of these types of plants in our pools. In the Santa Rosa Plain. You have to get on your knees once again to find these. They're all pretty small. We've got some nice fingers in these photos for scale, but it's worth it to look for them. So this here is Ranunculus lobii, which is actually also an endangered or threatened plant. It's a buttercup, a type of buttercup. Eleochris acicularis here. Isoetes hoelii down here. and Triglocan psiloides. These two can look similar, and you have to get down and, get up close with the vernal pools to find them. All right, that brings us to our first pause in our webinar to take some questions. This photo is of Ranunculus californicus, the California buttercup, and that is in the uplands of a vernal pool site that we monitor. All right, Christine, how's the chat going? Are there any questions or comments out there in the chat?
Yeah, there's a lot of great questions and comments, and people seem to be communicating with each other and sharing information about what they know about vernal pools. People were asking about hardpan. If it's not clay, then what is it? And our friend Candace Gilmore talked about the volcanic nature of the hardpan in our area, that it's consecrations from rock and sand layers. There were questions about grazing as well. Are our vernal pools grazed? So maybe you want to talk about grazing a little bit more in the vernal pools.
Great. Yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit more here in just a little bit, but we do graze some of our vernal pools that we monitor through our Adopt a Vernal Pool program. You can actually see the sheep that we use to graze one of our vernal pool projects out in the Boleto Fields wetlands, out along the Laguna Trail. So you might have seen those sheep there. If you walk on the Laguna Trail during the summer, you'll see them grazing in some vernal pool wetlands out there.
Very good. Another person asked early on, and that do vernal pools in the Laguna, are they always in the same place or do they move around?
That's a good question. For the most part, the vernal pools that we know of are documented and they are in one place, one area where remember that diagram? One area where those conditions exist makes for a vernal pool year after year. And if the conditions are right, it will be there. That being said, vernal pools can look different during drought years and during wet years as well. So their appearance won't always be the same on the landscape, but the area of the landscape where those conditions exist will hold a vernal pool. Yeah. And so we visit vernal pools over and over and over again in the same site.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Okie doke. Well, I think we'll have time for more questions here in just a little bit. So I will keep going, but keep asking those questions. And I'm glad to hear we have some of our biologist vernal pool friends hanging out in the chat. So thank you, Candace, for supplying your expertise and knowledge, and nice to have you joining us today. Okay. Moving right along here. There are 3 stages of vernal pools. This demonstrates the wet stage. It's during the rainy season and for a short period after while the pool is holding water. This is critical to the definition of what makes a vernal pool. Vernal pools are filled up predominantly by rainwater, not other sources of water. And this is a reminder that this is how the wet phase looks on the landscape. So this might give you an idea of, the matrix per se that we're talking about in the Laguna watershed. When we say it's a wetland complex, this is part of what we mean. Vernal pools are not isolated habitats. The full ecosystem includes the associated upland matrix beyond the vernal pools. You can see here there are some pools scattered across the landscape. And then here's what we would call the upland matrix beyond the vernal pools. And this is a waterway right here that floods out into the vernal pools when the conditions are right. The second phase, and the one we all love, I would say, is the flowering phase, short and sweet during the springtime. This is Burke's Goldfields, once again, in one of those man-made vernal pools. And the popcorn flower, that white flower in the background, is on the outskirts. Or actually, the popcorn flower is more in the vernal pool, and the goldfields on the outskirts. So this is the flowering phase for a pool that's not showy. Those pools that we talked about that have those tiny, weird green plants do still have a flowering phase. This is some of you from Sebastopol might recognize this spot. This is Tomodachi Park in Sebastopol, a site protected by the Ag and Open Space District. Under normal circumstances, you can go and visit this site and see these vernal pools yourself. So this dark green here, it almost looks like a shadow from the trees, but that is a vernal pool dominated by mainly green plants. The yellow is more Ranunculus californicus, or California buttercup. Finally, the third phase of vernal pools is the dry phase in the summer and fall, where they are almost indistinguishable from the dried up upland plants as well. So there are vernal pools in other places across California. This map shows the different regional vernal pool areas in California. Each region is different and has different soils, plants, and animals associated with their vernal pools. The vast majority of Sonoma County vernal pools are on the Santa Rosa Plain, and specifically in the Laguna watershed. This map shows the boundary of the Laguna watershed around the outside here. It's a 254 square mile watershed, and it's hard to see, but this map shows how most of the vernal pools in this area are west of the 101 in the Santa Rosa Plain before all of these creeks reach the main channel of the Laguna here. And it's really hard to see this, and I apologize for that, but this shows the ownership of all vernal pools in the Santa Rosa Plain. This blue, the vast majority of vernal pools are in private ownership, and you can kind of see that represented here, the blue dots scattered throughout. The next largest chunk is owned by the state, and you can see those kind of scattered throughout here as well. There are quite a bit of vernal pools that have been created for mitigation for housing developments and other projects as well. I can include this map in a follow-up email. I know it's really not the best visual, it's very small, but this gives you an idea that, you know, most vernal pools are on private property. Okay, so why do we care about vernal pools? Might seem obvious, but it's a good question to ask. One reason we care about vernal pools, as Christine mentioned in the beginning, is because they are critical habitat for rare plants. These three are mostly restricted to the Santa Rosa Plain. The Burke's Goldfields, Lysthenia burkii, is in the Santa Rosa Plain besides a single population in Napa. That is Sonoma Sunshine. It used to occur on the Santa Rosa Plain and through the Sonoma Valley, but it is now mostly extirpated there with only one known population in Sonoma Valley. But there is a newly discovered record in Mendocino. That was a recent update, so some hope there. And finally, we have Sebastopol meadow foam. There are 2 single species populations listed outside of the Santa Rosa Plain. All 3 of these plant species are listed under both the Federal Endangered Species Act and the California Endangered Species Act. So let's get up and look at these rare species a little closer. I'll talk about some ways to identify them versus some other common species that you might see. So once again, this is Burke's Goldfields here. and then rayless gold fields here. And this gets into a little bit of botanical jargon, but these plants are both in the aster family, the sunflower family. Sunflowers have the disc flowers in the middle and then ray flowers on the outside. Those are what looks like petals. The Burke's Goldfields has the beautiful classic sunflower look with the ray petals coming off, while the rayless Goldfields is named so because it has really reduced ray flowers. That's a better look of the flowering rayless Goldfield. Sonoma Sunshine is also in the sunflower family. This yellow daisy-like plant is very small, although it's hard to tell from these photos, and the Burke's Goldfields is really small as well. However, one of the key characteristics to tell the rare Blenosperma bakeri from common Blenosperma is the dark red stigmas inside those ray flowers of the petal-like flowers on the outside. So my iPhone was just barely able to capture that feature, as you can kind of see in the second photo. And here's a closer look at Sebastopol meadowfoam. The difference between common and rare meadowfoam is in the leaves. And we do have both common meadowfoam and Sebastopol meadowfoam in vernal pools in Santa Rosa. So this is a common misconception. They look incredibly similar in the flowers. However, the rare Sebastopol meadowfoam has these fun paddle-like leaves you can see here. They really do look like the oar or something to a boat. And then the common meadowfoam has these dissected linear leaves that are much smaller. So if you want to take a picture and post it to iNaturalist or send it to a biologist of meadowfoam, make sure you get a picture of the leaves. Paddles, once again, versus the linear leaves on the common meadowfoam. It would be remiss not to mention the endangered animal species of vernal pools as well, although I am partial to the plants. This is the California tiger salamander. It's a great photo. It was taken by Jeff Alvarez, who teaches the biology workshops we offer at the Laguna. California tiger salamanders are found mostly in the Central Valley, where their population is threatened, not endangered. However, the Sonoma County and Santa Barbara County populations are federally endangered. And vernal pools are necessary for this species to breed. When the salamanders come out of their burrows in November, it is breeding time. And this is likely to be on a very stormy night. They will travel as much as a mile to a vernal pool to breed. Pretty amazing journey. So we don't just care about the endangered species associated with vernal pools. There are lots of other species that use the habitat as well. There are native pollinators, from bees to butterflies, that can be found in vernal pools during the spring. Egrets and other birds will forage in vernal pools for frogs, snakes, and other small rodents. That's a garter snake pictured on the lower right. Other birds will nest in vernal pools rather than forage. This is a red-winged blackbird nest on spike rush, perched over the water in a vernal pool. Our conservation program manager, Sarah Gordon, found it while walking through a pool. As I said earlier, vernal pools are incredibly biodiverse, and they act as refugia for many different native California plants and animals. All right, I'm coming back on. Thanks for hanging with us. I think we've got, let's say, 3 minutes for questions. Chris, how are we doing out there?
Okay, yeah, still lots of dialogue going on in the chat box. It's great to see so much interest in vernal pools. There's still a lot of questions about grazing. What's our best strategy? How do we decide what type of grazing to use, and when's a good time to do grazing?
That's a good question as well. I know that the preferred grazer that we have found based on studies that we've done and the monitoring we've done in our program is horses, actually. They seem to graze the best plants and they create an impact that is actually good for the vernal pools. As for when to graze, I'm actually not positive on the timing for grazing vernal pools, but that is something we can follow up on if you're curious when you might see grazers out on vernal pools, or if you're interested in grazing something on your own property you think might be a vernal pool.
Okay, another question came up about mitigation of created vernal pools. Are they as biodiverse and as successful as natural ponds?
That's a great question. I don't actually know the answer to that question, so we'll have to follow back up. But I think there are vernal pools that are created for specific mitigation. Well, let me back it up. There's vernal pools created for specific species. For example, the Burke's Goldfields or Sonoma Sunshine. And those vernal pools are sometimes seeded with that species as well. So they end up being pretty good habitat for that specific species. Those vernal pools that I was showing in the slideshow, where I said those were created vernal pools, have really robust populations of those specific rare species, but I can't really speak to the biodiversity or how that plays out long term, whether that's sustainable.
Mm-hmm. There was another question about removing invasive species from vernal pools. So the question was, what's the best strategy for removing pennyroyal? Or what are
that's a good question.
Yeah, what are some of the strategies we've tried in removing pennyroyal?
So at the Laguna Foundation, we have done a lot of weed whacking and hand removal of pepperweed, pennyroyal in vernal pools. The grazing helps take care of some of those invasive plants. That's a part of why grazing is important for managing a vernal pool. And it also removes the thatch buildup that results from those invasive plants dying off. And they leave the vegetative matter in the vernal pool that it's hard for those tiny plants to grow up past that thatch.
One other quick question. Someone wants to know how the size of California tiger salamanders. How big are they?
They are some burly, stocky salamanders. I've never seen one in person, but I think as far as an amphibian goes, they are quite significant. Chris, I don't know if you have an idea, but I think they're a good sized salamander. Yeah. All the resources I've read online just describe them as stocky.
Yeah. I did see some tiger salamanders that Dave Cook was using to teach during his technical workshops on working with California tiger salamanders, and they shocked me how big they were. I think you're right. You know, they were like they were half the length of my forearm.
Wow.
Nearly. I have short arms, but they were really big. I definitely would describe them as big and stocky. Yeah.
Okay.
Question. Someone wants to know if they can get seeds for endangered plants.
You do have to have a special permit to collect seeds for endangered plants. And as you might imagine, they're pretty hard to come by. So the news I'm going to share is related to a project with collecting endangered seeds from an endangered vernal pool plant. So we'll go into that in a lot more depth, but know that it is a really restricted permit, and you are only allowed to collect them by permit only. Okay, we'll take a bunch of other questions at the end. We'll see if time allows, but keep on asking them and commenting in the chat. So thank you all for participating. I appreciate it. So there are threats to vernal pools, as you'd imagine. They're a highly impacted ecosystem, and that's partially why so many plants found within them are rare. The main threat is development and therefore habitat loss. This is a picture of Western Santa Rosa out by Fulton Road. The upper left here shows old school mitigation. The vineyard went in over 30 years ago. That's 30 years ago. And that small strip of green natural area is what they preserved. I know my video's not on, so you can't hear my air quotes there. The upper right was a Sonoma Sunshine pool here, and the property owner just leveled the entire parcel for a strawberry farm about 10 years ago. No permit necessary. That property is now abandoned. So the lower right here, these two circles have since been turned into housing. That triangular parcel right here to the west is set aside for mitigation for those developments. We're here to the grazing. So here's that preferred grazer, as I mentioned, with some grazers that can work in the background. The vernal pools that are intact and protected need land management. This is incredibly important and mostly overlooked. Originally, the rush was just to set aside land to protect vernal pools. But without appropriate management, many pools still lost their native plant diversity. It's critical to do vegetation management to protect pools from non-native grass and other introduced plants. This can be done in a number of ways, as I mentioned, through mechanical management with weed whackers or hand weeding, or through grazing. This mimics important disturbance regimes that have changed dramatically in the Santa Rosa Plain ecosystem. This is an ungrazed property, Boleto Field, that used to have meadow foam. Without management, the thatch buildup is extreme. You can see here, that is, holding just a layer of the thatch. The vernal pool forbs are really short-statured, and most of them cannot compete against this thatch. All right, past that sad part, we're going to talk about what we're doing for vernal pools and share our exciting news. Our primary conservation program is called Adopt a Vernal Pool. This is a 13-year-old monitoring program to track trends, develop relationships with landowners, and keep an eye on what's happening with the rare plant populations. We monitor or work with others to monitor 20 sites. This is about a quarter of the known documented sites in the Santa Rosa Plain. This is a critical opportunity to observe and learn about what is working and what is not for the vernal pools in the Laguna watershed. So our program is centered around the concept of a preserve of actively managed pools. But it's a discontinuous preserve in a couple of different ways. It's made up of many different parcels that are scattered throughout the watershed, and our involvement is discontinuous as well. It ranges from providing support and guidance to interested landowners to formal contracts where we manage the land. The diverse nature of the pools, the landowners, and the type of contract makes this management uniquely complex. This is our intro slide here, and this is an example of a voluntary conversation with a landowner. We didn't knock on their door and ask them about their property. We develop these relationships with them and do outreach. In this case, they reached out to us and said, what can I do with this vernal pool on my property? This property came into new ownership, and the new owners didn't have horses, so the rare plants you see here started declining. So the new landowners voluntarily decided to re-fence the property and bring in cattle to graze and maintain this habitat. And that was not initially part of their plan as new landowners. This is another example of a partner we work with to manage vernal pools. This is the Earl Baum Center for the Blind. We work with the facilities manager to rake thatch from vernal pools on their property. We can't graze this area because this is a property for the visually impaired, and the vernal pool area you see here has a trail system. You can see someone on it that visitors use regularly. These are actually Santa Rosa Junior College students assisting with the thatch removal. Okay, are you ready for the exciting news? Some of you may have heard that we added a new element to our conservation program last year. We received a special permit to collect the Sebastopol meadow foam seeds from the wild and grow them in our nursery on site. We got these permits from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and those permits for collecting endangered species, as I mentioned, are extremely difficult to come by. We grew Sebastopol meadow foam plants for seed bulking to enhance and restore a diminished population of meadow foam that actually occurs within the Sonoma County Regional Park's Boleto Fields wetlands. We collected about 500 seeds in 2018 and then ended up collecting 130,000 in 2019 from the plants you see here that we grew in our nursery. It is amazing, from 500 to 130,000 seeds. We had a lot of beautiful plants to visit on our lunch breaks. The meadow foam plants essentially had celebrity status for the month that they were blooming like this in our nursery. Here's Asa and Elias, our restoration technicians, with some of the seeds they collected from the meadow foam that they grew in the nursery. We planted out 75% of those 130,000 seeds we harvested from our nursery meadow foam plants out in the Boleto Fields wetlands last fall, right before the winter rains. And as of just about a week ago, we can confirm that the seeds we planted out in Boleto Field have sprouted and bloomed into a beautiful population of thousands of Sebastopol meadow foam. We haven't been able to do the monitoring quite yet, but we're looking at what we think is thousands of plants here. Brent, our ecological program manager, just took these photos last week. These are happy plants. You can also see the dow ninja growing in amongst the meadow foam in this photo. It was really good to get some hopeful news during this time. I was so thrilled to see these photos and be able to share this with all of you. And it's really good to see the unique biodiversity of this county being conserved now so that future generations can enjoy it just as we do. This is a little blurry, but still gives you an idea of the size of the population. The regional parks, as you know, are currently closed due to the shelter-in-place order. And the silver lining in that closure for me is that these plants will get a good undisturbed start to reestablishing their population and their seed bank. This population is not located by any trail, and we ask that you please let it grow and expand in peace. There are other, more convenient places you can see rare Sebastopol meadow foam by trail. Which leads me to my last section. I'm sure you're wondering where you can see a vernal pool. We lead vernal pool botany field trips every spring through our community education program, this spring being the first exception in a long time. These trips are often to private locations, not usually open to the public, and they are really the best way to see vernal pools that are not open to the public and in a more ethical manner. So keep an eye out for those trips coming in spring 2021. This is another photo from a field trip to a private vernal pool. That's Wyethia angustifolia in the uplands in the foreground, and then you can see the vernal pool back here. There are some public locations that you can see vernal pools. I mentioned earlier, Tomodachi Park for looking closely at those weird green plants as well as flowering upland species. This photo was taken at Youth Community Park in Santa Rosa that has vernal pools you can visit. This photo is of Sonoma Sunshine. This population is struggling to hang on there, but it's one of the sites we monitor every year. The Earl Baum Center is just down the road from the Laguna Environmental Center, and they have a walking trail that weaves through several lovely vernal pools. It's open to the public during business hours. One of their pools has Sebastopol meadow foam that you can see from the trail. Remember to use your best etiquette in general when viewing vernal pools. Stay on the trail and don't trample any of the delicate plants found in the pools at any of these locations. Sometimes you get lucky and vernal pool plants will actually be in your trail. I took this photo of Dow Ninja in the trail out in the seasonal section of the Laguna Regional Parks Trail. Of course, none of these sites are currently open to the public due to the coronavirus, but now hopefully you've got some on your list for the future. All right, wow. This is my last slide. I will take some questions and then we will make our closing remarks here with just a couple minutes at the end. But I love this photo and I would love to hear your, oops, sorry. Let me bring it back up. Okay, I would love to hear your questions as well and comments if they're out there.
Yeah, there were a lot of hoorays for the meadow foam.
Good.
In the chat box. So thank you everyone for celebrating the success of that project. Some people wanted to know when we planted the meadow foam seeds.
We planted the rare Sebastopol meadow foam seeds out in Boleto Fields in November of last year, so right before it rained.
Very good. And someone also asked about the grazers before there were horses and sheep. Prior to human interference, which animals grazed the vernal pools?
From what we know about the Santa Rosa Plain, there was a few different grazers, I think. There used to be elk that would graze out on the Santa Rosa Plain, as well as deer. But the disturbance that we're really missing out on the plain is actually fire. And grazers kind of can recreate the effect that burns would have had a long time ago on the Santa Rosa Plain. They mimic that disturbance regime, but the main disturbance we're really missing out on the Santa Rosa Plain is low fire in the undergrowth across the plain.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I also want to give a shout out to all of the, it seems like there were a lot of vernal pool experts in our audience, lots of conversation about the plants and vernal pools that are occurring in different, say in the Sacramento Valley and other areas in California. So thanks to all of you who were engaged in answering some of the questions that were popping up in the chat. All right, well, Allison, thank you so much. That was informative and lovely and a really fun exploration into spring. Thank you for sharing all of those great slides and all the knowledge. We also want to let you know that we're offering more free webinars next week and into the month of May. Sign up today for Botany for Beginners, taking place on Tuesday, April 28th from noon to 1. That'll be a presentation by Caprice Disbrow, a botanist and instructor from Santa Rosa Junior College. Also join us for wildscaping for native songbirds on Thursday, April 30th from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. This webinar will be taught by Veronica Bowers, founder and director of Native Songbird Care and Conservation. Saturday, May 2nd is a date to mark on your calendar. We're proud to be part of the virtual eco-friendly garden tour video series, and that's sponsored by Sonoma Water. May 2nd is also the day for the online sale of native plants by our partner, the Milo Baker chapter of the California Native Plant Society. So their sale will open up on May 2nd, and this year the plants are going to be delivered. So you can visit our website or visit the Milo Baker chapter of the CNPS for more details there. Also on May 2nd, we will host a virtual gardening and native plant Q&A session with April Owens, the horticultural chair of our Milo Baker chapter of CNPS. This virtual Q&A program will be brought to you in partnership with our colleagues at Daily Acts. We're also looking forward to the webinar, A User's Guide to the Laguna Watershed. That'll be a presentation by Dr. Wendy Trowbridge, the Laguna Foundation's Director of Restoration and Conservation Science. This program will be held on Thursday, May 14th from noon to 1 p.m. Register for those webinars and learn about new programs and events by visiting the community education page of our website. Also check out the new education resources page on our website where this webinar will be posted for future viewing. And also keep an eye on your email. We will send out a follow-up to today's program that will include answers to more of the questions from the chat and a link to where you can view the webinar again. There are many ways to engage with the work of the Laguna Foundation. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and please go to our website to sign up for our monthly events email and the Laguna Foundation e-news. That's lagunafoundation.org. Thank you for celebrating Earth Day with us by learning about Sonoma County's ephemeral wetlands, the awe-inspiring vernal pools. All of us at the Laguna Foundation wish you good health and well-being. Goodbye for now.
Thanks, everybody. I forgot to mention that, sorry, Christine, I forgot to mention that our Adopt a Vernal Pool program is supported completely by individual donors. And if you have the means at this time to support this critical work, we would really appreciate it. And thank you so much to those of you that already donated upon registering for this webinar. We'll add the link to donate online to the chat box, and we'll have it in the follow-up email as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy Earth Day, everyone.